Hi, everyone. Welcome to From Fact to Fiction. I'm Linda Whitaker. I write speculative and near future thrillers laced with science and technology under the pen name L.M. Whitaker. I also host this podcast, From Fact to Fiction, where we unpack the truth behind my favorite specialty thrillers. Think Steve Barry, Michael Crichton, John le Carre. And while these works differ in specialty, from historical to techno thriller, medical thriller, spy thrillers, each immerses the reader in a new but realistic world. And the best of these blend fact with fiction so well, you don't know what is, what could be, and what's totally impossible. It would take an expert to know. And that's why each time we meet, I'll pair up with an expert and we'll select a new specialty thriller. We'll not only talk about why we love the book, but unpack the truth behind the fiction. Our book today is called The Teaching by T.O. Paine. It's inspired by the author's real life experience in a cult. This novel follows Rain Harkin, who spent her life in a secluded religious community in northern Nevada, believing its teachings without question. But when she finds a terrified girl in the woods and the girl vanishes after gunshots shatter the silence, Rain's world begins to unravel. Threatening messages warn her to leave, and as she searches for answers, she uncovers a dark truth. Not all the Haven's teachings are true, and its secrets may be deadly. Dun, 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 dun. So, our expert today is the author himself, T.O. Paine, an award winning author of 6 fast paced thriller suspense novels. He's a member of International Thriller Writers and holds a master's degree in computer information systems. He's run 50 marathons in 50 states, ridden his road bike over 10,000 miles up 10,000-foot mountains, and completed an Ironman. And of course, Tony's also a former cult member, and his real life experiences inspired his book and make him our expert today. Tony, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Sorry for the long intro. Thank you and welcome again.
Yeah. Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this. And it is so perfect from fact to fiction because
Yeah.
over half of the book, and I'll just show
Thank you. Thank
the
you.
picture
Thank
of
you.
the teaching, what it's called. Over half of the teaching is fact, I think, in even though it is a fully fictional thriller novel. Um, Rather than most thrillers or like a lot of movies, they say, based on true events. Really,
Mhm.
none of the events in my book are very true because it's about the missing girl and kidnapping and things. However, everything else, the setting, the religious type of practices that we performed,
Wow.
and then, I didn't directly write characters in that were actual real people. They're all a combination, though, of people
Mhm.
that I lived with, the different behaviors and things I incorporated into new characters. So yeah, it's awesome.
Wow.
Fact to fiction. Like half of this book is
Wow.
fact.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, before we start talking about your book, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page because we hear the word cult tossed around a lot today, and usually it's like on the political spectrum. So, would you mind defining for us kind of what you mean when you say, a cult?
Yeah, for me, it's very difficult to define a cult. I think it's difficult for anyone.
Mm.
There's such a wide range of gray of, some people will feel just a few things make something a cult, and other people feel like it takes a lot. One of the biggest things, and it was true in the cult I lived in, versus like a religious organization or even a small group of people who like to get together. Cults are typically based on people following a leader, a human or a couple of humans who are very influential, very charismatic, Jim Jones and the Kool-Aid, all that, versus other religious and spiritual organizations or even communal living organizations that are way less culty. They tend to follow a doctrine. Like there's that separation. There's a book, a Bible, some collection of something that is not, human based. That's one of the big differences because people fall in love with their leader, and and then they begin to get influenced and start doing things. And that leads me to the other thing. There, I learned living there that there are really like two kinds of cults. There are very peaceful cults and people who live communally, and they do so for years. And that's where it gets blurry because some people say, well, they just live different. They just do weird things and share everything. They're not really a cult. And then there are what's known as destructive cults, where at some point the cult if it's a doomsday cult, it's leading them towards some day where everyone's going to die. Or more often than not, it's like the one I lived in where they're taking advantage of people's finances.
Ah, yep, yep. Okay. Um, do you have any idea how many cults operate today?
So it kind of depends on the definition,
Okay.
but it is shockingly large. It is, yeah, it's like I would consider, for me, I think, well, there's like a range that's between 3,000 and 10,000, depending on how you
Wow,
define
wow,
it. And in
wow,
my definition, it's like 6 or 7,000. Um,
wow.
However, there are a lot of them, and I mentioned the financial thing. There are a lot of cults that will start up. They only have 10 or 11 people, and they will purposely operate for a year or two just to try to suck money out of their members, and then the cult goes away. And
Wow.
so that ups the number of cults because
Yep.
it doesn't take very many people to have a cult
Wow.
for a short time.
Oh. All right, well, let's get into the facts behind the fiction of the teaching. So, your first-hand experience makes you an expert on cults, or at least those of a certain type, Tony. Can you tell us a little bit about your own experience?
Yeah, absolutely. It is perhaps a little bit different because I believe, especially when they were really popular, and it's still popular now to be in a cult in a way, but back in the 70s, there was like a lot of like cult movement and belief in
Oh,
doing that. And that is when the cult I joined, that's actually when they formed, was way back in the 70s. My story's a little different because my wife and my two daughters, we did not join until I was 35 years old.
mm,
Um, and what happened was very quickly, my wife was put up. She was the first child of this couple in 1970, and she was put up for adoption. When she was 21, her parents contacted her and said, "Hey, we're your birth parents, and by the way, we've been living in the cult for the last 20 years, ever since you were born, basically. And we also went on to have four other kids who we raised in this cult." Of
wow.
course, they didn't say the
That's,
word cult. They
yeah.
said, we've been living in this loving communal society that a
Mm,
lot of people are accusing us of being a cult, but we're
mm,
not. So she met them when they were 21. I met her when she was 22. And then we suffered some life tragedies.
mm,
We lost a couple of children,
oh,
and we're seeking something more in life and help and hope.
mhm,
And she had this family and the teacher of the leader of the family, who's actually, and this is portrayed in the book. Really, this is one of those things that's portrayed in the book that's not an event. The teacher, the leader, is a was a person who died in the 1500s, a doctor in England, and the voice of this doctor from 500 some years ago would be channeled through the leader of the cult that we were in. And
wow.
every Sunday we would go and we would listen to teachings from this spirit speaking
Mhm,
through. So that's how we came to be in the cult. And
wow,
like a lot of people who join cults, that's one of the big reasons is hope, like looking for a different way of life, hope,
mm,
despair. We also had the thing my wife wanted, she spent the first 21 years of her life not knowing her real parents. She wanted to get to know her real parents, which also that was like a huge reason, and the cult stuff slowly slipped in.
ah,
So, and
and
we lived there for about 4 years.
oh, wow, that it's just so unusual. Did you start in with kind of a skeptical mind, and then you decided I mean, it makes sense. He's saying great things that are seem personal or seem true or seem real, or how does that progression work? So
Yes, it's pretty amazing. People will believe what they want to believe.
mhm.
And anyone who's lost anyone in life, like a loved one, wants to believe they're in a better place. And so like with our first daughter that who we lost to cancer, here we had this person, whether my wife and I ever actually fully
Mhm.
believed that the leader was actually trancing someone or
Mhm.
not, that still is pretty blurry. But we had a very charismatic person. The leader was a woman, but she channeled a man's voice, and this doctor from the 1500s, he was on the other side, and he was able to tell us things about our daughter, who was on the other side.
Wow.
And
Wow.
that is a powerful thing to be able, and obviously you can see where that could become very manipulative
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
because you want to believe that you want to believe everything is great, and you miss
Yep.
them. So.
Yep. Yep. Wow. Well, what inspired you to open up your life and write a fiction novel? I mean, half of your life and half of a story, of course, but what inspired you to do this? And
Um, Part of it was after leaving, and we had a lot of very good reasons to leave. Um, I felt like it was important and valuable experience, but I didn't want to write a memoir
hmm
because I'd always liked, I mean, Stephen King, of course, and Joe Hill, and I could name 100 other thriller type horror authors. I always wanted to do that kind of writing. I also felt at the time that it wouldn't be very safe for me to write directly about what had occurred. So I wanted to fictionalize it.
hmm
So I was, and it was the real things of every Sunday us going and listening to the spirit, and then the manipulative things. The cult that I was in, they wanted tithing, they wanted financial security, they wanted money. There was never any talk of doomsday or anything like those types of cults. It was more get people. If people, we noticed over time that people joining, they often were they actually were like in their 40s or 50s a lot of times, and they came from wealthy families who were in due inheritance. So
hmm
I wanted to write about that, but um, not directly. I
Yeah.
wanted to make it entertaining and have fun being a fiction horror type writer.
Yeah, yep, yep, and you did succeed. I was struck by that in that the leaders lived at a higher standard of living than everybody else, and of course that's not new. If you look at some of the big, religious churches where the leaders have jets and giant mansions, and so it's maybe as much a smaller level, but yeah, seems like that
Yeah.
part was not that surprising to me, but.
Yeah, and that's yeah, that's in the book.
Unfortunately.
And in real life, the leader's house was 3 times the size of anybody else's cabin. Everyone, we pretty much lived in just different weird mountain cabins, but then
Mm,
their cabin had been added onto and rebuilt to where it was like gigantic. So, and
wow.
that is true across so many cults.
Mhm. So in the book, it's a small number of families that were going for generations, and kids were born into the cult and stay in it. And that sounds like that's what kind of you would have experienced, your wife would have experienced. Her sisters and brothers grew up in this cult, and did they stay? Did you have people that were multi-generational here that lived
Yes,
here?
absolutely. There were, because it began in the 70s, there were at least you could say like 2 generations
Mm-hmm.
um, of kids and people who grew up through the cult, which is actually in researching is incredibly rare. And that also lended to their attractiveness because they people when they found out about the money manipulation and trying to get money from people, they were classified as a destructive cult. But really, we lived near a small town and blended in and went to school sometimes there. They also had their own school on the cult kind of compound, but it was not so much that it wasn't really that strange. Watched football, and we used to
Mm-hmm.
call it the cult of beer and cigarettes because drink beer and all that kind of stuff. No
Wow.
big fences or gun arsenals or anything like
Mhm,
that. And so kids grew up there believing that they were just like part of a different church
mhm,
and
mhm.
part of a different thing. And yeah, and when they go to church, there's a voice that talks through someone, and they knew that. And I remember talking to my brother-in-law, asking him, how do you believe this? And he's like, because it's always been this way.
Mm,
Um, but I found out most cults last less than 10 years. They're not generational, and they typically, the leader gets what they want out of it, or the leader, they people get frustrated with the leader because the promises they made to get them to join after
mhm,
years don't come true. Our cult leaders were pretty powerful. They kept it going for over 30 years. And they had in the next generation, they were training other people to do trance to
mm,
keep it going. But like I said, the one thing that makes a cult different than religion is it's based on a leader, not a
mhm.
book.
Right.
And when leaders, and they couldn't transfer it, and when the leaders die or go away, the cult goes away. And
Mm,
that's what happened in this case.
mm. I liked in your book that you didn't expose how much of the religious and spiritual aspects that people believe, including the teachers themselves. I like that you kept it, as you said, maybe some people believe fully, some maybe didn't, but were there for the community and all levels in between.
No, that everything you said is 100% correct. And you never know what is in someone else's reality in their head. I don't know how many people fully believed or how many times they doubted that that was a real voice. But when we would meet, like when we would have our Sundays and sit in a completely pitch black room, as described in the book, and then the voice would come out, it was like therapy. It was like a big group therapy session, and the voice would pick out people to talk with them and know things about them that the voice wouldn't have known otherwise, or the way it seemed, and say, oh, hey Jake, I know you've been having problems with your wife, who, and she's sitting right there with you now, and here's what you should do, and like give, it was really like therapy advice. And so whether you believed or not, people were feeling like they were getting help.
Mhm,
And a lot of the goal, the overstated religious part of the goal was, it was a past life where you believed in reincarnation.
mhm. Wow.
And the goal was that you come to Earth, you're separated from the one entity of everyone and everything, which is God. You come to Earth to learn what you need to know in order to be a full part of that one entity. And the goal is to live and learn and follow the teaching so that when you die, you never have to come back.
Wow.
And so all of the lessons are to make you a good and better person. And there was nothing destructive about the lessons. There was all good therapy advice. Um, there was nothing evil in what the spirit would tell people to do.
Wow.
Other than occasionally the spirit would complain if somebody hadn't been tithing enough, but
Uh-huh.
only a tiny little bit that didn't really become noticeable till
Wow.
later for us. But so that was interesting. It was actually very helpful, and it actually helped my wife, I think, and I in a lot of spiritual kind of ways,
Mhm.
actually. Um,
Wow. That is
like, not often people say, "Well, it wasn't all bad for my cult," but it wasn't.
wow. And was your in the book, it's kind of not aside from the having those aspects of reincarnation and the having the person trance, and there was no other specific religion chosen. It wasn't a Christian religion. It was a kind of all religions were welcome in your book.
Yes, that was also, which I think was one of the brilliant things.
Mm. Yeah.
It was they were very accepting of anyone and everyone. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter what their background was. And we had, I'm not sure we had a few people that came all the way from Russia,
Mm.
that found the leader and found and joined the cult. There were people from a lot of different places and a lot of different religious backgrounds. And the idea was that just the teaching following that, you go to your one true God, and if you want to believe it's this God, or that there is no God, but you should follow these things so you don't have to be reincarnated,
Hmm.
it, none of that baggage mattered.
Wow. Wow. How did they get new? How does someone from Russia find your little community? How does they
Yeah,
find it?
right. So I thought about it, and I wasn't there in the 70s, and I know like we came in 2006, so that was quite a ways.
Mm-hmm.
What I believe, and kid or my wife's siblings and other people could, know way more than I do. But I think in general, when you get the first four or five people into a cult and believing it, then it really becomes kind of word of mouth for a while of like those four or five people meet people and make friends, and then they get interested and they just start grouping them together. In the case of this cult, it started in the 70s. In the mid 80s, the leader was going on tour to radio stations
Oh,
trancing, and
wow.
they would have her trance on a radio program and talk about the stuff,
Oh,
um, and for entertainment, and then people would hear that, and I believe they got some people from
hmm.
that.
Wow. That is surprising. You think you just
Yeah,
don't, that's, yeah, goes against
yeah, yeah.
everything.
They had a two or three little pamphlet type books, and they were
Mhm.
got pretty popular in that
Oh.
little sect.
You know what happens underlying your book? You've got the mistrust of the outside world. And so when things happen, you don't know if bad things are going on. The girl is kidnapped early on, so not a spoiler. Or missing, I'm sorry. She goes
Mhm.
missing early on, not a spoiler.
Mhm.
Mistrust of the outside. Is it someone from the outside? And every outside mistrusts them. And they, to some extent, you know, don't know each other, or anyway. So there was a lot of um interpersonal dynamics between people living in the cult and the outside world. And that made for great tension in your book.
Mhm.
There was a lot of fantastic tension there around the story of the missing girl.
Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to do also with the book was like have the perspective from inside the cult. And rather than most cult movies or most stories are somebody is abducted into the cult,
Yeah.
I wanted to show that the people in the cult were the normal people somewhat, and
Hmm.
that somebody who had been living in the cult was abducted out of it into
Wow.
the normal world, and they wanted to find out why, and that was the other kind of flipped the script a little bit.
Yeah, it was great. It works great. And let's wrap it up then to thank you very much for coming today and joining us
Mhm.
on From Fact to Fiction. Appreciate it so much. Can you tell people you've got the teaching was your first book, five
Yes,
other suspense thrillers with
yes.
one new one. Do you want to tell us about your new one?
Sure. And I have a copy of it here. It's called The Crisis, and poster behind me as well. And this would be the fifth book that I've published. And
Oh,
like you said, the teaching was the first. And every book has gotten a little bit less dark and a little bit more fun. From the teaching was a kidnapping and really dark and evil things happen, to the latest book, The Crisis, which is Smokey and the Bandit meet the Cuban Missile Crisis,
oh my
and
God.
it is more of a crime detective fiction.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. And I hope everyone out there, thank you for joining us on From Fact to Fiction. And we will see you next time.
Yep, yep. Thank you, Linda. Appreciate it.
Yeah.